And aside from just sports, obviously like ancient Greece gave rise to like the philosophers, right? And like just men of thinking and I guess you could say like other types of mathematicians and whatnot. So you had like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So out of those, like which one like sticks out to you personally?
Yeah, that's a great question. Socrates, unfortunately, is the most mysterious of all the characters simply because he never wrote anything down himself.
Yeah,
Everything we know of him comes from either Plato, Xenophon, or Aristophanes. So, how much can we take as being, Socrates' descriptions are probably that of Plato's versus those of Xenophon. But of the two I've read the most, between Plato and Aristotle, Aristotle is interesting in the sense of how he forms a lot of the solid ideas of what are more relevant to us, like the scientific method of establishing theories, experimenting, and determining. When you read his works, they very much are lectures, and that's how they are structured and preserved. He didn't write these down intending to be a style, like to be read. They were preserved from his teachings and then kept through antiquity. Plato, on the other hand, is, I think, much more digestible and readable simply because he structured his philosophy in the form of stories and dialogues. The famous one being the Apology, where Socrates
yeah.
communicates to Athens about virtue, or the Republic, which is probably the most famous work, where he articulates what aspects make a virtuous society, how to run a city state, etc. Do I
A
necessarily
utopian
agree with either
society.
one? Exactly. And
Yeah.
with that, I can't say there's one that really gloms to me. I mean, a lot of people lean towards Stoicism, which is later in development after these main three. But I think I always found Plato to be the more readable of the two, so I know more about his philosophy than Aristotle's.
Have you ever read any of his books by any chance or no?
I've read both Plato and Aristotle. I've read Plato, the Euthyphro, the Crito, the Phaedro, and the Republic. Most of the Republic, anyways, which are the kind of the main books they usually want to go into. There are many other dialogues, but there's also Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics, some of the Poetics, and a bit about his scientific works. But Aristotle's works are much harder to get into because they are so dry, but they are interesting nevertheless. I've read multiple pieces of ancient Greek and Roman philosophy outside of that, but of those two, I've probably read more Plato.
I do want you to remember Socrates because I will bring a point back. Like I do want you to remember this because, but obviously, like these, we know that because you mentioned Plato, obviously, and if I'm not mistaken, Aristotle was before him, right?
Aristotle succeeded Plato, so it
Oh, he
goes in
was after him. Oh,
traditional
right. Oh,
of
okay.
Socrates,
Oh,
Plato, and then
yeah.
Aristotle.
Oh, just making sure. So obviously, we know that Aristotle obviously taught like Alexander the Great, and like through that, I guess in a way, some of his ideas did spread to most of the world in a way.
In many cases, famously Alexander, when he was a young boy, was apparently tutored by Aristotle. His father, Philip II, invited Aristotle to become a patron of his court and teach his son. The literary sources emphasize that Aristotle and him had a pretty strong connection, and whether or not the teachings of Aristotle, like his Aristotelian virtues and whatnot, had influenced Alexander, or at least spawned this idea of curiosity towards the natural world, towards peoples he's never met before. Traditionally, Alexander and Aristotle, how much Alexander influenced others by this Aristotelian teaching is unknown. Aristotle himself, though, his knowledge was spread throughout the world and preserved particularly in the Roman Empire, later on in Western Europe and the Middle East, where that later on you have the rise of the golden age of Islam, where you have the Abbasids ruling. Aristotle was preserved quite a bit in those
Yeah,
traditions, and also in the Byzantine Empire, since it was Greek texts. But
yeah.
yes, there was quite a bit of inspiration, and most of the scientific ideas of Aristotle were translated later on into later Greek and Roman authors.
Okay. It's interesting.